Hello, friends. Before I tell you a real scary story, please like and subscribe so you don't miss the next videos. Also write a comment on what topic you want a scary video on. My name is Henry Cooper, and I am a private detective. Most of my cases are no more than boring investigations of marital infidelities and petty thefts. But one case changed my life forever and made me doubt reality. It all started with a phone call. I received a request from a woman named Mary Black. She was in despair. Her brother Sam had gone missing. The last time he was seen, he was heading to his new house in the small town of Pinewood. She insisted something was wrong and asked me to investigate. I arrived in Pinewood in early September. It was a typical small American town where everyone knew each other. But the atmosphere was oppressive, as if the town was hiding a terrible secret. The locals were reluctant to talk when I asked about Sam. Most of them just avoided eye contact and quickly walked away. I found Sam's house on the outskirts of town. It was an old Victorian house standing alone amidst a dense forest. It looked abandoned and neglected, although Mary claimed Sam had recently bought it and planned to renovate. The door was unlocked, and I entered. Inside the house, it was dark and quiet. The air was filled with the smell of dust and dampness. I called out for Sam, but there was no response. Walking through the rooms, I found nothing unusual until I reached the basement. The door was ajar, and a faint smell of rot emanated from below. I stepped into the basement and stopped midway down the stairs. It was dark, but I sensed something was wrong. I pulled out my flashlight and turned it on. The light revealed old furniture covered in cobwebs and something else. Strange symbols were drawn on the floor, symbols I couldn't recognize. The basement seemed much larger than I expected. I felt I should turn back, but something drew me further. As I approached the symbols, the flashlight began to flicker. I heard footsteps behind me and quickly turned around, but saw no one. My heart raced, and I decided to return to the main floor. In the kitchen, I found an old diary. It belonged to Sam. The last entries were from the day he disappeared. He described feeling strange in the house, as if it had a will of its own. He wrote about hearing strange noises at night and the sensation of being watched. Suddenly, I heard the basement door slam shut with a loud bang. I rushed to it, but it was locked. I started to panic. The thought crossed my mind that I could disappear just like Sam, but I gathered all my strength and rammed the door with my shoulder. It opened, and I ran outside. I decided to return to the local bar and talk to the people again. There, I met an old man named Joe, who became more talkative after a few glasses of whiskey. He told me the history of the house. It turned out that the house had belonged to a family that disappeared many years ago. The locals believed the house was cursed. The next day, I returned to the house with the intention of conducting a more thorough investigation. This time, I brought a weapon and some self-defense tools. I started again with the basement. When I reached the symbols, I noticed one of them had started to glow faintly red. It was some kind of ancient curse. I found a hidden door leading to a secret room. In it was an altar, and on it lay a diary. It described rituals the family performed to protect themselves from an evil spirit they believed lived in the house. But something had gone wrong, and they had become its victims. Suddenly, I felt a cold breath on my neck. I turned around and saw a dark shadow approaching me. It was formless, but I could feel its malice. I pulled out my gun and fired, but the bullets passed right through it. The shadow drew closer, and I began to lose consciousness. The last thing I remember is running out of the house, screaming at the top of my lungs. I passed out on the lawn in front of the house and woke up several hours later. The locals had found me and taken me to the hospital. After that incident, I never returned to Pinewood. Sam was never found, and the house remained empty. But I knew it was still there, waiting for its next victim. I never managed to understand what exactly happened in that house, but I never felt safe again. That case changed me forever. I could no longer sleep peacefully, constantly feeling someone was watching me. I left my job as a private detective and moved to a big city, hoping to find peace. But the memories of that house and Sam never left me. Every night when I close my eyes, I see that shadow approaching me and hear a faint whisper calling me back. My name is George Stevens, and I've been working as a private detective for 20 years. During this time, I've seen a lot. Betrayals, crimes, disappearances. But what happened to me in the yellow house on the outskirts of the city changed my life forever. I don't know why I agreed to take this case. Maybe something in the client's voice on the phone made me feel a chill down my spine. She told me about her brother, who had gone missing in an old yellow house. Arriving at the location the next day, I felt a strange atmosphere surrounding the house. It stood alone, surrounded by old, seemingly dead trees. The door creaked as I opened it, and it was dark inside despite the bright daylight. I turned on my flashlight and began inspecting the premises. Dust covered every corner. The furniture was old and worn, but there were no signs of violence or struggle. I went up to the second floor where the bedroom was located. The bed was made, but the blanket was slightly rumpled as if someone had hastily gotten up. Suddenly, I heard a sound, as if someone was walking on the floor. Looking around the room, I saw nothing. The sound repeated, this time clearer. I turned and saw a figure standing in the doorway. A tall man in old-fashioned clothes stared at me with empty eyes. He silently raised his hand and pointed at something behind me. I turned sharply, but there was no one there. When I turned back, the figure had disappeared. This was the first sign that something was wrong with this house. I decided to stay the night, hoping to find more clues. I brought a sleeping bag and comfortably settled in a corner of the living room where there was more space. Night fell quickly, and darkness enveloped the house like a thick cloak. Sleep came unexpectedly, but I was awakened by a terrible scream. It came from the basement. I quickly got to my feet, grabbed my flashlight, and ran downstairs. The door to the basement was open, and a cold wind was coming from there. I stepped onto the stairs leading into the darkness. My flashlight illuminated only a small part of the path ahead, but I continued descending. The basement was large, much larger than I had expected. Old paintings hung on the walls, staring at me with empty eyes. In the corner, I saw an old wooden chest. I approached it and opened it. Inside were old photographs and letters. In one of the photos, I saw the man I had seen earlier. I began reading the letters. They were addressed to a woman named Elizabeth. It turned out that this house belonged to a wealthy family who lived here in the early 20th century. The man in the photo was the head of the family. He wrote that he was tormented by nightmares and felt the presence of something sinister in the house. The last letter ended with the words, "He is coming for me." Suddenly, the scream was heard again. I looked up and saw the same figure standing in the basement doorway. It silently stared at me, and then slowly began to dissolve into the air. I heard heavy footsteps behind me. Turning around, I saw the man in old-fashioned clothes. He reached out his hand to me and spoke in a low, eerie voice. "Leave this place while you still can." I dropped everything and ran upstairs. When I ran outside, I felt something invisible try to grab my arm. I barely managed to break free and ran to my car. It was still in the same place where I had left it. I quickly started the engine and drove away. When I returned to my office, I found information about this house on the internet. It turned out that the entire family had died under mysterious circumstances. Their bodies were found in the basement, and strange symbols were left on the walls, which no one could decipher. For 2 days after that, I couldn't sleep. I felt that something was unfinished, that not everything had been done. So I decided to return to the yellow house. This time I took more equipment with me. Cameras, a recorder, and even special devices to measure paranormal activity. Arriving at the scene, I set up cameras all over the house to miss nothing. The first few hours, nothing happened, but then the camera on the second floor recorded something strange. A dark shadow flashed across the room and then disappeared. I ran upstairs to check what had happened, but found nothing suspicious. At night, I heard the same footsteps and screams again. It seemed that the whole house had come to life. I felt something invisible moving next to me, hearing its breathing behind my back. Suddenly, my devices started showing high levels of activity, indicating the presence of a ghost. That night, I decided to go down to the basement again. As soon as I stepped on the first step, I felt a strong cold go through my body. I took the recorder and began asking questions, hoping to get answers. At first, nothing could be heard, but suddenly the recorder captured a faint whisper. "Leave this place." I realized I had to go, but something was holding me, not letting me go. In the morning, I gathered all the recordings and returned to my office. Listening to the materials, I realized that there was not just one ghost in the house, but several. Each of them had their own story, their own tragedy. I decided to help them find peace, as only this way could I close this case. I turned to experts in paranormal phenomena, who helped me organize a ritual to cleanse the house. It was a long and exhausting process, but in the end, we managed to free the souls that were suffering in this place. After that, the yellow house became an ordinary, peaceful place. I felt that I had made the right choice by taking this case, even though I had put myself in danger. But every night when I go to bed, I still hear those eerie screams and whispers. And although I know everything is over, part of me will always remember those terrible events in the yellow house. My name is Michael Smith, and I am a private detective. Throughout my career, I have encountered many cases, but none of them prepared me for what happened last summer. I was sitting in my office when the phone rang. On the other end was Mrs. Allison Blackwood, a well-known businesswoman whose son had gone missing. He had disappeared several months ago, and the police couldn't find any leads. She hired me because she had heard about my success in similar cases. I agreed to take on the investigation, unaware of what awaited me. Mrs. Blackwood told me that her son, Jacob, had recently become interested in old houses and intended to buy one of them. The last place he was seen was an abandoned mansion on the outskirts of town. Locals called it the House of Horrors. They believed it was haunted, and many claimed to have seen strange things around it. I decided to start my investigation at that house. As I approached it, I felt an unsettling sensation. The house was old, with peeling paint and broken windows. Its appearance sent chills down my spine, but I knew I had to go inside. Entering the house, I immediately noticed the smell of dampness and decay. Old furniture and dusty items were scattered everywhere. I searched the first floor but found nothing. Then I decided to go upstairs. The stairs creaked under my feet, and I tried to step carefully to avoid breaking them. On the second floor were several rooms. I opened the door to one of them and saw a nursery. In the corner stood an antique crib. Suddenly, I heard a strange noise behind me. Turning around, I saw that the door I had just opened had closed by itself. My heart began to race. It could have been just a draft, but there was something about this house that made me doubt. I reopened the door and left the room, deciding to check the other rooms. Next was the bathroom. Entering it, I noticed a message written in red paint on the mirror. "Leave while you can." The message looked fresh and it scared me. Someone wanted me to leave this house, but I couldn't go without finding out the truth. I continued to explore the house and found stairs leading to the attic. Deciding that I might find something useful there, I climbed up. The attic was dark and dusty. I turned on my flashlight and began to inspect the space. Suddenly, I heard a faint rustling sound, as if someone was moving behind me. Turning around, I saw nothing suspicious, but then I noticed that one of the boxes was open. Inside, I found an old photo album. On one of the photos, I saw Jacob with some people I didn't recognize. But what scared me more was that on the back of the photo was written, "We are here forever." I decided to leave the attic and inform Mrs. Blackwood about my discovery. As I descended the stairs, I heard footsteps behind me. Turning around, I saw a shadow that disappeared around the corner. My hand trembled as I pulled out my gun. I was ready for the worst. Reaching the first floor, I noticed that the front door was open. Maybe someone had entered while I was upstairs. I quickly exited the house and returned to my office. The next day, I met with Mrs. Blackwood and showed her the photo. She was shocked to see her son in the company of strangers. She told me that Jacob had a few new friends she knew nothing about. I decided to find these people and learn more. After several days of searching, I found one of them. His name was Thomas, and he was Jacob's former neighbor. He told me that Jacob had been acting strangely lately and often talked about some evil presence in the house. Thomas said that Jacob even considered performing a ritual to banish this evil. I realized that Jacob had likely become a victim of his own fears and superstitions. But where was he now? Thomas said he last saw him near the house. I decided to go back there once more. This time I took a few colleagues with me. We entered the house and began to search it again. In the attic, we found another room we had missed before. It was locked, but we managed to open it. Inside the room, we found Jacob. He was dead, with signs of a struggle on his body. It seemed he had tried to defend himself from someone or something. We also found an old book of rituals. I realized he had indeed tried to perform some sort of ritual. The police conducted an investigation and concluded that Jacob had likely died due to his own actions. But I knew there was something more in that house. Something that no one could explain. This case left me with many questions that I will never get answers to. My job as a detective doesn't always bring relief or answers. Sometimes it leaves only fear and unresolved mysteries. Jacob Blackwood's story became one of those mysteries that will stay with me forever.